ever managed to get perfect timing going live. Hi, welcome to LinkedIn Live. I'm Andy from RecWired, and it's 2:00 UK time, and I'm with my friend Charles Causey from Agile Partnering to talk to you about risks and opportunities in the USA in a latest of our series. Charles, for people who haven't met you before, a little quick intro.
Sure, and glad to be here, Andy. I really appreciate having me on. So Charles Causey and I started a company called Agile Partnering about 11 years ago, and we provide employer record, back office, payroll funding solutions to staffing companies in the USA, work with a lot of UK companies as well as US domestic firms.
Fantastic. So thanks for taking the time today. So for folk who haven't, perhaps tuned into one of these before or contemplating looking at USA and indeed Canada, tell them a little bit about the market and why, if you're a UK recruitment firm or any European recruitment firm, why you should be looking at that market.
Sure. Yeah. So for anybody who's not familiar with or maybe just starting to dip their toe into it, the reality is that as we all know, that the UK market, specifically the recruiting and the staffing sector, has been difficult. It's been difficult for a while. There's been ups and downs through COVID, up and then down, afterwards. And a lot of UK founders and back office professionals are looking at other markets to figure out, all right, how do we go from where we are today and how do we improve profitability and continue to grow? And does it make sense just to keep focusing on the UK, or should we expand out elsewhere? And the USA market is really attractive for some very practical reasons, like it's a shared language. The language barrier is not, and the time barrier is not that big of a deal. But from a financial point of view, it's a much larger market. So if you're in the UK, it's maybe a $50 billion staffing market. You look at the USA, it's by most figures, conservatively $170 billion to $200 billion plus. The US market's a lot more stable. So it's not a massively booming industry per se. I would say it's sort of latest figures, I think this year, steady uptick at 1 to 3%. However, there are sectors within that huge market that are certainly growing faster than others. So there's lots of opportunity to be found. Another reason that UK companies look at the US is because if you look at the number of small to mid-sized staffing companies in the UK and the number of small to mid-sized staffing companies in the US, they're about the same number. That is, it's about the same number of small to mid-sized competitors in both countries. However, the U.S. market is 3 to 4 times bigger. So it's a less relative competition with a peer-to-peer sort of basis. Those are the few ones. I could keep rattling on. Probably the last one I should mention is the margins. So in the U.S., you're going to see margins of typically 25 to 35% margin compared to what, Andy? 10 to 15% in the U.K. There's always outliers, but that's probably about right. And that can result in about a 40 to 50% more profitable recruiting business in the US if you're just doing the same thing that you're doing in the UK. So a whole lot of reasons there. Everybody's got their own reasons, but those are some of the big ones.
Yeah, what you talked about there is absolutely spot on. Not only the salaries and the charge rates higher, but also the margins you can charge are significantly higher. And I think a lot of the reason for that is hirers in the US want to really avoid risk. They don't want the risk of these temporary workers anywhere near their books, anywhere near being seen as the employer, etc. So they're happy to outsource it to recruiter folk to deal with.
Yeah, you've got a whole chain of events over here, and it's all around the risks that are in the back office, essentially, whether it's the growth of the MSP networks, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. A lot of the, to your point, I'm sort of echoing what you said there, but a lot of the contract negotiations to go with staffing companies, it's not just about who can find the right talent. It's about who's willing to take on some of that risk. And that's a real piece of being successful over here is knowing how to manage that.
Absolutely. I always found as commercial director, there's black and white and there's always shades of gray. So it's about if you do everything nothing ever gets done, you don't make any sales, and if you do everything wrong, typically you're going to get found out and go out of business. So it's about I guess working, being compliant, but also as well making sure that risk is also an opportunity.
I think it's a great point. As a matter of fact, one of the things we've promised to share today on the episode is to talk about things to look for in EOR. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but I always use the language of legally informed, but also business reasonable. and if we imagine a Venn diagram, there is a sweet spot somewhere between those two, and that's a really important part of a staffing company finding success, and it's also something that you need to look for in an EOR partner if you're a staffing company looking to partner with one.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be a frustration of mine. Used to come, used to send a contract off to the legal department, and used to come back with 100 things that are wrong with the contract. And it's cool. Give me the one or two that are really going to be the difference. And what's a real risk? What's a theoretical risk, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think that's really important.
I think I'll riff on that point, and we'll skip over it later. I'll just briefly highlight. I couldn't agree more. I think we have a lot of clients roll over to us from other employer of records because of that specific issue that you're hitting. And what I always tell people is, look, if you're working with an EOR, and I would say this to my internal legal compliance team as well, risk management and risk mitigation is really important. You have to be legally informed to be successful in the staffing business. Certainly, you want your employer of record. They should be educating you on compliance, right? And giving you the why behind all their policy decisions. And that's important. You have to have that. What you don't want to do is have someone who's Wild West. I've had 2 situations recently where I've had clients tell me that employers of record have said things like, worker classification is totally up to the worker, just ask them what they want to do. Well, the staffing company in that situation is now picking up all the classification risk, which is years of potential back taxes, overtime, and penalties. And it's because they're listening to an employer of record that doesn't know what they're talking about. I've heard that twice about 2 separate EORs. So you want them to be legally informed. On the other hand, we know this, right? We want them to be business reasonable. And I think one of my sort of pet peeves is when in any industry, and this you probably being someone with a prestigious executive background, you'd agree, it's not all about risk mitigation. Business is about managing risk. It's about risk optimization. And the reality is it's not black and white. In our businesses in the EOR, classification is a great example. Workers' comp risk is a great example. Risk is notoriously difficult to quantify. And so there's gray area decisions that have to be decided. And, if you're looking for an EOR partner, you want a partner who's going to be business reasonable and legally informed. They're not going to be totally policy driven, totally risk averse, but they also know what they're doing. And if they tell you no to something, they're going to give you a reason why, and they're going to try to give you a way to enable the deal. Otherwise, your recruiters are just going to be frustrated because they keep getting no, and they're doing their jobs, but they're not able to generate revenue for you. So, anyways, I'll get off my soapbox, but that is such an important piece of finding a good partner in this space.
So do you want to obviously just define what an EOR is? So it's probably one of those things people on this video might actually, or the live, might not actually really. It's one of those things, perhaps am I too a little bit embarrassed to ask what an EOR actually does, but do you want to explain what an EOR does and what is that actually?
Absolutely. I think I'll explain maybe the problem that it solves, and that'll sort of give good context instead of just defining it. So let's just say that you're a UK staffing company. You're starting up in the United States, and you could be based elsewhere, but we use a UK staffing company. Let's say you've got anywhere from 10 to 50 runners in the UK, but you want to get launched in the USA for all the reasons we talked about. There's a few hurdles that are going to come into view pretty quickly. One is you need an entity. So an EOR is going to solve that problem. If you have an entity in the US and you've made that investment, you're sort of what I would call a phase 2. You're going to have both internal workers potentially and also external workers. And I'm going to differentiate there. Your internal workers, you can basically payroll them directly in most cases without creating a ton of complexity or risk or anything. Or you can use a PEO called a professional employer organization. That's a co-employment model where they're basically going to give you software and some access to some tools, but you're still carrying the risk. They'll have guidance for you, but that's pretty straightforward for your internal salaried workers. The issues arise with your contract workforce, especially in a multi-state environment, because now I'm going to describe those problems and I'll explain how an employer of record solves it. You've got administrative issues because now you've got onboarding, timesheets, invoicing, all the back office things that you would expect in any country. But then you've also got the legal risk because now you need to have an internal team who's an expert in a multi-state environment, like 50 little mini countries. That's a slight exaggeration, but it's not entirely untrue by any means. So, 50 little mini countries, and you've got to be able to onboard and pay them accurately. And that is a situation where if you mess it up, it can get expensive very quickly. I had a client last week who they ran afoul. they're basically moving over to use our service, but it's a prospective client. They were trying to payroll contractors themselves. They were a few days late on a payment and it cost them $15,000 because they were in a locality that said you have to pay them by X date. Otherwise, you have to pay them double comp until you get caught up. So it's those little things that are that adds up, right? So you've got the compliance challenge, and then you've got the payroll and the credit risk challenge. There's no company's house in the USA. So, and I know company's house is not perfect up to date, it's retroactive, but it's very hard to get credit information. So you have to be really, really savvy with managing credit. So administrative, legal, and funding, an employer of record, a savvy one, a good one, can take care of all of those issues for you. Now I'm going to answer exactly what it does. An employer of record basically comes in and says, hey, for the contract workers, that employer of record is going to be the sole employer of record for all the fiduciary and statutory purposes. So all you've got to do is send a purchase order, a job order, and this is not just unique to Agile Partnering where I work, right? This is any good EOR that specializes in recruiting. You're going to send across a PO, and they're going to be responsible for onboarding compliantly. They're going to be responsible for the timesheets, depending on which provider you select. They're going to have capacity potentially to invoice and payroll fund, and they're actually going to absorb the risk for you, not just give you software to quote for you to manage it. So that employer of record will also reduce your tax complexity because now they're in a multi-state tax nexus situation instead of your US entity. And then I'll wrap up just saying the whole goal in my mind, just as an entrepreneur myself, right, as a business owner myself, is a great EOR is going to help you focus on what matters, which is finding clients and making placements. It's about generating gross profit. And all that back office stuff, not only could it be expensive and risky, it's just noise. It's noise that's not worth the founder's time. And so using an employer of record, at least as you start up and you scale up, that's the core value prop.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the way I'd equate it, and certainly my advice to anyone starting up is you try the market. This is, you've obviously got other products, which I know you do for firms as they grow or scale, but there's a point where it's just not worth, up until you get to a critical point of scale, it's a point where it's not even worth you having that thought in your mind. It's the equivalent of starting in business and buying your office. You don't know how big your business is going to be. You've got to outlay a whole bunch of cost up front, and ultimately it takes away your focus from what it is you're looking to achieve.
I couldn't agree more.
You might as well rent a desk in a WeWork or something and see how it pans out, and then gradually
establish a beachhead, right? It's like, with certain models, and I can't speak for other EORs, but at least for us, like, we literally can sign somebody up in a day. You can be ready to onboard a client the next day and onboard your worker the next day. And, all that can be done almost instantly without any cash out of pocket. Do you want to use that model forever? No. But to your point, what's going to help you focus on getting that first client, getting the first placements, proving out that you can actually be profitable, and then you can begin to invest in additional infrastructure yourself and move the EOR to the back of the scene.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect example. One of my customers yesterday, they've done permanent recruitment in the US for 2 years, and they had one of their customers reach out and say, hey, can you, and it wasn't even, can you find us these workers? Can you run these workers for us? And it's a conversation, introduce you guys, and off they go. And suddenly they've got, a competitive pitch to do this off the bat. We've never done contract recruitment in the US.
100%. Yep. It's a conversation we have on a regular basis. I had two this past week, actually, where people have been in perm business, they're starting up contract, and they've got an opportunity to go place 10, 20, 30 contractors. That's a game changer for their business as a permanent business. And, they hear about us on podcast referral, and it's like, Charles, all we want to do is we just want to place it. And the value prop for us, and I'm sure a lot of employer records, but for us is we want to make the contract placements as easy as a permanent. So that's the core value prop that we're bringing to market as an employer of record for staffing companies.
Just remember, anyone watching on LinkedIn, if you want to ask a question to myself or Charles, I suggest you ask to Charles. He's much more knowledgeable. But you just write a question in the comments, and we'll do our best to answer that as we go. So, Charles, one of the things that we set out to do when we sort of prepping for this call was to talk about. You've obviously talked a good scenario when EOR works. What are some of the things that you've seen that haven't worked?
Yeah. I would say the first thing that comes to mind. I don't have a big slide on all the pitfalls per se, but I've got the things to look for. The biggest thing that comes to mind is that I think a lot of EORs, especially large and traditional EORs, will do. I shouldn't call it fear mongering, but it's very much the USA is impossible. You cannot come in here, that sort of thing. You can never work with an independent contractor compliantly, and it's these sorts of messages that are just, they're overstated, or I'll leave it at that. They're overstated, and people end up leaving money on the table. They either don't come to the US, or they have potentially totally legitimate independent contractor engagements, and they simply don't make them. I spoke with a client or prospective client 3 weeks ago, and they literally been walking away from multiple placements every month because some of the talent pool in their segment were independent contractors. That's literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. So those are some of the things that it's just like that. That's not an ideal situation for the staffing company, for the end clients, or for the contractors. And it's because of overstated concerns around the liabilities. There's plenty of staffing that's done here. You can do it compliantly. Just need to have the right partner.
Okay, so yeah, that's the sale. Is it fear as opposed to opportunity?
Yeah, 100%. Would you like for me to pull up? And I'm going to share a screen in just a second, I think, and I'll talk through for anybody on the call that is actively thinking about the United States or Canada, looking at employer record partners. And I'm just going to echo, Andy, your comments of, if anybody has questions, by all means, feel free to put them in the chat, ping me on LinkedIn later. Every time I hop on calls like this, my goal is just to be useful, right? It's to be useful. So feel free to throw some questions on there.
Okay, while you navigate the sharing, and I've never done this on LinkedIn Live before, so this is a first. Question from Jean-Claude. Will there be a recording that we can watch later? Yep. After we finish this live, it appears on LinkedIn under this same link. So on Restream, there we go, and it works.
It does work. Okay, great, because I cannot see you anymore, so you'll just have to guide me. But it sounds like you're able to see my screen, yeah?
Yep.
Cool. So you're a recruiter. You're thinking about an employer record. You're wondering, what are the attributes? I've tried to be as objective as possible. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm an employer record provider, but I've tried to be as objective as possible in sharing with you what I would be looking for if I was running a staffing company and I was looking for someone who provides what Agile Partnering provides. First thing, table stakes. This is obvious. Competitive pricing. Yes. Get at least 2 prices, maybe 3, whatever you want to do. But price around a little bit. There's not a lot of variation in the market. I know the market really well after doing this for quite some time, but make sure it's competitive pricing, basic compliance and functionality. Sometimes this isn't even table stakes. You'll have people with a slick website. They're running their back office on a spreadsheet and Zapier tools. Not a good idea, but make sure they've got basic compliance functionality and easy to use software. So all that sort of goes hand in hand.
The other thing I would say just on that table stakes, competitive pricing is important, but if it's too cheap, then you should really be asking yourself questions around it, because it costs money to do it properly.
100%. Yeah. We've got a client who's rolling over to us right now, and they went with a low-cost provider. They've been through 2 EORs. They've had brutal experiences, and they're rolling over to us, and we're slightly more expensive, but not far off. And they're happy to pay it. The CEO literally told me, like, I'm absolutely happy to do it. We've got to have better service. We've got to have contractors that are happy. So yeah, it's good call out. All right, top 5, drum roll. Here we go. Number 1, recruiting specialty. So if you hop on to Claude, ChatGPT, Google, whatever your search medium of choice is these days, and you search for employer records, you will find a lot of employer records that and their value prop sounds something like employ anybody, anywhere, anytime, globally. Employ anybody, anytime, anywhere, globally. They're going to have some version of that. And I would really steer you away from those companies. The reason for that is that those employer records are designed for companies looking to hire salaried workers elsewhere in the world. That is a very different set of problems and solutions than a recruiting company trying to start up and scale up in the USA and Canada. A lot of those companies are going to be software based. They're not actually service companies. They're really software or tech enabled fintech companies. So you're going to be carrying a lot of the risk. You're going to be doing the administration of it. And so we rarely compete with those, but sometimes I'll come across companies that have used some online platform and they're having a brutal experience and they've got a tremendous amount of compliance and not compliance, but administrative issues in the back. So find an employer of record that specializes in staffing, and ideally one that specializes in staffing in your specific geography areas. Really important. I also mentioned this for Canada as well. Like, we have a wholly owned subsidiary in Canada. We only operate in the USA and Canada, so we're very niche focused. This is another area where, if you're thinking about hiring in Canada or other areas, either know that you're going to use multiple EORs or that you want your current EOR to have that capacity and they're not outsourcing too much of that.
Yeah, because
Andy,
there's a lot of that partnering. You're dealing with a firm, but actually, who are you actually dealing with? Are they in country themselves? Are they specialists themselves? Very common.
Yeah, very common. Most of these global EORs are not global EORs. They're basically fronts, and they're subcontracting to whoever's got the entity in New Guinea or wherever they're going to be hiring the workers. And I would encourage everybody, think about this from a contractor experience, right? That's what matters: is, are your contractors happy? Are they making you money? If that contractor is having to go through some software that's been subcontracted from an online platform and your team is trying to communicate with them, it's going to be difficult. It is. And so, anyways, geography is part of that specialty as well. Breadth and flexibility of services. And interrupt me, obviously, at any point, Andy, if I fail to communicate well. All EORs are not created equal. There are some EORs that just do one component of employee record service. There's others that have a breadth of service. And my encouragement is, speak with a few employer records and find the one that can tailor suit their model to your unique needs. So, for example, you were talking earlier, Andy, about, when you're, why use an EOR? If you don't even have a USA entity, you have a set of needs there that need to be tailored to. That's different than our clients who have 200 plus contractors and they're using an EOR. Those are two or three different models that you would move from in your need set. So just know that if you're going to market, you're looking at employee records, don't expect for all of them to have the same functionality. Ask yourself, do you want to engage independent contractors as well? The answer is probably yes, depending on your sector, but you've got to do so compliantly. Do you want to handle invoicing, or do you want them to? Payroll funding is a big one. Is it recourse? Is it non-recourse? There's all sorts of levers that can be moved to adjust and accommodate your needs. And if you're speaking with an EOR and they can't do those things, or they have to start introducing you to a bunch of third parties, that's something that would raise a flag if I was in your shoes. Any comments on that number 2, Andy? Or should I keep going?
No, I think that's right. I mean, it's like CRM software. There's no perfect CRM, but you're looking for the one that fits you the best. And it sounds like your point spot on. You basically looking for the right EOR for your business at the right time.
Yep, agreed. Number 3, we've already covered this one. I would say, if you're trying to figure out, let's say you've got 4 EORs in front of you and you're trying to figure out, okay, Charles, which one's going to be legally informed but business reasonable? They're not going to tell me that. They might not even be self-aware about that. A couple guiding points. Number 1, if the company has been acquired by a large, global sort of a workforce or any sort of like large provider, and I'm not calling any specific companies here, this is true from any industry. The bigger the company is, though, the more policy driven it's going to be, the more legally compliant they're going to be. They're going to be focused on that. The less exceptions they're going to be willing to make, the more it's going to be answers like, well, that's just how we do it, or that's our policy. And I mean, would you agree with that, Andy? Do you feel like I'm overstating there? Or do you feel like that's fair?
No, I definitely think there's 2 types of the EOR. There's the classic platform EOR, the big guys, the unicorns that are building and scaling, and then there's the guys that do what I'd call the people service. And I think those big platforms serve a purpose, absolutely. But I think in terms of the firms that provide the service, you generally always one degree of separation from the guy who makes the decisions. Whereas in those bigger firms, you're right, it's completely policy driven. And I think we're in a people business, and therefore I think, people have different needs, and therefore actually working with those service-based firms, for me anyway, and, was always more important.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So you can look for that. You can see who's been acquired, who's not. It's not that if someone's been acquired, they're not the right shop to work with. Absolutely, and you can still speak with them, but it is something to keep in mind. Of just know, like, that's the direction they're going to have. New attorneys come in, and stronger attorneys, more compliance oriented, and it is going to become more and more of a platform play as opposed to someone that you can actually speak with. This sort of ties in as well, service experience. I would just encourage you. Obviously, we talk about our service, but talk with clients. Get some backdoor references. Oftentimes, we will. I had a lady yesterday who called, actually, in the New York area. She had been asking around to a bunch of other staffing firms and recruiters who she knew. This is a former top biller. Who do you recommend? And we had a few references that were naming us. That's a really smart way to go about it, right? I don't know if she's speaking with other folks or not, but that's a really smart way to do it. So backdoor references. And I just would encourage you, find the firms that are focused on creating client delight and customer delight for you, right? You're going to have unreasonable contractors. When the unreasonable contractor gets frustrated and they're calling you, your team, or the EOR, how is that EOR going to respond? Are they going to actually be focused on serving them? And are they going to have reps who are asking the question, does our policy apply to this situation? And if so, how do I explain this with tact? Or are they just going to be, putting them into a queue? So that's really important, because if the contractors aren't happy, it's going to make your life miserable. You know that. And it's going to cost you money, because ultimately you're going to have more attrition. And the last point I'd point is just tech and automation forward. I think any great EOR is going to be continually investing in their technology. We can use the term AI. Certainly, we're making investments in that space as well, carefully, with all the security concerns with AI that are coming out. But you want a platform that has API connectivity and availability. Ideally, and this is actually an important one, probably for me to pause on, Andy, the ability for an EOR to adapt to what your current infrastructure is, as opposed to just giving you a hard line of this is exactly the box that you have to fit in. Timesheets are a great example. If you've got a global timesheet portal, is your EOR going to accommodate and use that timesheet portal? Are they going to require you to use their timesheet portal in their specific geography? It's just one example of thinking through operationally for your team, what's going to actually, which partner is going to be the right one for me. But you need an EOR who's going to be future-proofing themselves with continual investments in their tech.
And I think that's a really good point, because, like you say, it may well be you're operating against across 10 countries, right? You don't want to have to work out 10 systems. You're much better off starting with your system and working with a provider that can work around you. And I do think that's super important. And the other general thing you tend to find is people will try and work with one EOR, because then you can obviously invest time integrating your systems, your processes. And again, just go back to an earlier point. You want this to be as simple as possible for the contractor and the customer, the user experience, because ultimately, I think as an agency, the EOR effectively is, acts on your behalf. So once you've made the placement, they'll probably have more interaction with the company that's running the payroll than they will with the recruiter. So on a fortnightly basis, for example. So generally choosing a partner who looks and feels like an extension of yourself is very important.
Yeah, 100% agreed. 100% agreed. All right, I'm gonna navigate the stopping of screen sharing here to the best of my ability. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah, I'm keen to see how this works. Oh, that was seamless. There we go.
Good.
I'm no longer afraid to screen share now. That's great. For anyone as well who has watched this before and got this far in the LinkedIn Live, I'm in a slightly different environment today as my regular office got flooded. So I'm in another room at the house, slightly more interesting. So
I would just say that you live in an area of the world where you do have some really good wine near you, which makes me jealous, because I'm in the part of America where we do not have any wine that's grown near us. So anyway, it's very appropriate with some of that back behind you. I like it.
Yeah, we're very good with the wine here. So if there's any more questions, feel free to pop them on. But Charles, I think that's a very comprehensive, and I think I really took your point there around service, actually, because it's the biggest reason I see people move EORs is because of service. And I think it's about, companies as well setting expectations around what they want, EORs being very honest with what they can do, and working in partnership. I've sort of navigated enough scenarios where it's the company in the wrong or the EOR in the wrong, but ultimately the net effect is the contractor has a bad service, the customer has a bad service. So I genuinely think it's one of those things where you need to look at, if firms are working with EORs, they need to think of it as much as a partnership. Just because they happen to be paying money doesn't mean it's a customer-supplier relationship in that sort of true classic sense. I think to get the most out of this, and obviously the best for your customer and your contractors, to really work as a partnership.
I completely agree with that, and it's that's actually one of the joys of my job. That, not to overstate that either, but I really enjoy leadership, and I enjoy leading a tech-enabled service business. I don't classify us as a software business, although like I spent 20 years in that space, and we have our own platform and custom software. We are in a service business, and it's like Horst Schultz, who's the founder of I think it's the founder of Ritz-Carlton, says, "We're ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen." And I love it. We just talk about that, and we try to bring that heartbeat. And I think, whether it's us, another great EOR provider, that's ultimately what's important in staffing companies, because everybody is in a people business, and those contractors need to be kept happy. The recruiters need to be kept happy for you to, grow the business.
No, absolutely. Charles, great as always. And I think you've done a good job there. You've not said the fear and said why you must do it. I think you've given the reasons, very practical, very good commercial reasons why using that's a great thing. So if people want to get hold of you, how can they get hold of you?
Yeah, just find me on LinkedIn, Charles Causey, Agile Partnering. You could also reach out to Ashley Hicks. She is she spent 7 years in recruitment. She's based in London. You can find her as well, Agile Partnering on LinkedIn. And Andy, thanks for having me. This was fun. And if anybody has questions, by all means, let us know. We're here to help.
Yeah. Thanks, Charles. Catch up soon.